Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We can wait a few minutes as people come in. Feel free to start chatting in the chat on the right-hand side if you have any questions or comments. All right, as people start coming in, I will start with some just general housekeeping tips. First, just thank you all for joining us today. If you don't know, my name is Emma. I'm a reporter with Knox Pages and Ashland Source through Report for America, which is a national service program that places journalists in local newsrooms across the country to help sustain local news and to report on undercovered issues and communities. So first, you'll notice that there's an Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen. You can type in questions there throughout the event, and the panelists, who I'll introduce shortly, will take time at the end to answer them. If you have any general comments and not necessarily questions, you can use the chat, as I had said, on the right-hand side of the screen. And then the other last thing that I wanted to bring up is also at the bottom of your screen, you'll find some polls that you can answer throughout the event. It's just under the polls button. All right, so first to get started, I wanted to give you a bit of background how this event came about and how the reporting for the event came about. So I think we had all basically heard about this idea of a workforce shortage in the spring. I had moved to North Central Ohio in June for this job, and I had spent my first few weeks there exploring and observing, and it seemed that everywhere I went, both businesses in both counties, businesses were hiring, whether it be restaurants, small businesses, manufacturers, etc. So I decided to take a deeper look into these national claims of worker shortages and find out what was really happening here and why. So during the pandemic, or during the beginning of the pandemic, I should say, several employers cited health concerns as to why workers had left. Others had attributed it to a pandemic era federal unemployment benefits, but those have since ended and jobs have remained difficult to fill. So it indicated that there was more at play. So from speaking to some economists, local employers, employees, and other community leaders, such as those that you'll hear from today, I found that the workforce in Ashland and Knox counties had reassessed work. More people have voluntarily quit their jobs than ever before, and not all people who lost their jobs during the pandemic are seeking new ones. I also heard from local employers that they've faced retention challenges and problems with just workers simply aging out and retiring. So in response to these challenges, I spoke with some employers who are trying out some new strategies, which you'll hear more about today, such as offering signing bonuses, higher wages, childcare. So that's kind of the brief synopsis of the series I had done back in July. And today we're going to hear directly from some of the community members involved with the workforce. So to introduce them, you see them on screen now. We have Philip Glandon, who is an associate professor of economics at Kenyon College. We have Doug Reynolds, one of the owners of Uniontown Brewing Company in Ashland County. We have Mark Osborn, senior VP at Corna Kokosing in Knox County. We also have Brandy Booth, who is with Opportunity Knox Employment Center. And last but not least, we have Kristin Aspin with Ashland County Community Foundation and its Women's Fund. So first, we're going to hear a bit from each of the panelists. I'd like to start with economist Philip Glandon. So I guess first, PJ, can you tell us a bit about workforce and labor trends throughout the pandemic thus far?
Absolutely. It helps if I can share some pictures. So I'm going to try sharing my screen here to show you some of the data. Hopefully everybody can see this. All right. So to begin with, this is the national unemployment rate and Ohio's unemployment rate over the course of time. This is monthly data, so each month we get a new reading on the number of people who do not have a job but are searching for one, divided by what we call the labor force. That would be everybody who has a job plus those who are searching for a job but don't have one. So that's the unemployment rate. And what you can see here, the gray bars on all of my graphs, those indicate recessions. And so to put the pandemic into some context, I have the Great Recession included here. And so what you can see looking at this, I'll just highlight a couple of things that strike me as relevant. One is that in terms of the intensity, this recession was pretty severe in terms of unemployment rate. We have never seen unemployment rise as high as it did nationally, and this is often true at the state level. Going back, and it hasn't been since the Great Depression that we've seen unemployment get this high. But we also recovered extremely quickly. Nationally, we're not quite back to normal if we think of normal as sort of the 2 years preceding the pandemic. Things were going great in 2018 and 2019 in terms of unemployment. It was very low nationally and in Ohio. But in Ohio, it looks like we kind of got back to something like normal, at least in terms of unemployment, by about October last year. So a very short spell of really high unemployment. But I want to show you what it looks like locally. So we have what's called the local area unemployment statistics. And this is an attempt to estimate what unemployment looks like at the county level. So I've got Ohio here for reference, and then Ashland, Knox, and Richland counties. But I'm presenting the data a little bit differently here. What I did is I took the average unemployment rate in each of those locations, and I've reported it here. And what I've got here is the unemployment rate minus the sort of baseline. The idea here is to get an idea of, how bad things got relative to normal, and then see how quickly things got back to normal, where normal would be the line getting back to zero, essentially. And my main takeaways from this picture would be that in Knox and Ashland counties, first of all, things weren't quite as bad as the rest of the state, and certainly nationally, in terms of number of people who reported being unemployed. We also got back to normal fairly quickly as well. So again, it looks like by October, at least in terms of unemployment, things have been more or less normal here. And I want to mention that I'm not sure how much to make of this sort of recent rise. These data are not seasonally adjusted. So it may well be that, for example, there are people who entered the labor force who were searching for a job, and that would have caused this unemployment rate to go up. And I would consider that to be kind of positive news, not so much bad news. And again, it could also be just sort of discrepancy for statistical reasons. I don't know how much to make of a change in unemployment at the county level of 1 or 2%. Okay, but this doesn't tell the full picture, because there's also people who left the labor market altogether. Those are people who say, no, I don't have a job and I'm not looking for one. So to get the full picture, we really need to look at the employment to population ratio. So that's what I've got here. And what you can see is that there was a massive drop during the intense part of the pandemic. That's basically April of 2020. And that people are essentially getting back to work, but we're still well short of where we were in terms of fraction of the population that is working. So even though unemployment's come down, that doesn't tell the full picture. There's still quite a few people who are not in the labor force at all. And the big question is why? And Emma mentioned a couple of possibilities. Maybe this is due to generous unemployment compensation. Perhaps there's people who still believe it's too risky to go back to work. Maybe people are taking this as an opportunity to change careers. Maybe there's a big wave of retirement. And perhaps wages kind of need to adjust to get people sort of back to the labor market. Looking at the same basic idea, but at the county level. So here I've got total number of individuals who are employed. again, for Ashland, Knox, and Richland counties. And I'm doing this sort of same exercise where I compare this to a baseline measure. That's essentially the year average prior to the pandemic, the year ending February 2020. And what you can see is that actually Knox and Ashland counties, we're pretty much back to where we were in terms of total number of people who are working. Now, this doesn't tell us anything about the mix or what jobs these people have taken. It may well be that some of the people who are reported as working, this is by county of residence, not by county of employment. And so it may well be that there's some people in Knox County who had been working here that are now working somewhere else. But roughly speaking, we're sort of back to normal in Knox and Ashland County. Richland County appears to be a few thousand people shy of where they were going into the pandemic. Okay, so if we look at the picture nationally, just to sort of bring this all together, we've lost about 2.5 million workers due to unemployment. So these are people who want a job but haven't taken one yet. Now they could be searching. They may be sort of willingly unemployed because they think they can find a good job if they spend a little time searching. But then there's another 2.9 million people who have left the labor force altogether. So that's a total change in employment versus pre-pandemic of about 5.4 million people. That's a lot of workers. To put that into perspective, the labor force in the United States is around 150 million people. Okay, just a few more pictures and then I'll let the more interesting folks speak. So I was curious about what this looks like sort of by sector of the economy. And so here I'm doing, again, sort of a comparison to the way things were right up to the pandemic. So this is employment by sector. Not surprisingly, you can see that leisure and hospitality, which would include restaurants, got just decimated by the pandemic, right? So something like half of the people were working in leisure and hospitality at the worst part of the pandemic, but it's still 10% below where it was going into the pandemic. Most of the other sectors are getting closer to back to normal, but definitely, 2 or 3 percentage points below where they were prior to the pandemic. And just to close out with this last picture, this is job openings nationally. Unfortunately, I don't have this data at the state level. And what you can see is essentially since March of 2021, we basically break a record since we've been measuring this data each month. And so since we've been measuring job openings, there have never been more job openings in the United States than there are right now. And so I think I'll leave it there and let folks who have more to say about their specific situations next.
Thank you, PJ. All right. So now we will actually be switching into hearing from a local employer in the restaurant industry, which PJ had talked about. So first, we're going to have Doug Reynolds with Uniontown Brewing over in Ashland. So Doug, I guess my first question for you is, can you speak a bit to how your workforce has shifted throughout the pandemic? Did you have employees quit? Did you have to lay off employees at one point? Can you give us some insight into that? I think you're muted.
Yes, we were greatly affected as every restaurant was. We were all shut down. We had closed for 2 weeks completely with no customers, and then did the entire time of takeout. I ran some numbers yesterday. We were down 75% in sales for almost 3 months there, which is tremendous. We went from 35 employees to 7. Hired once May 21st came around, we brought all 35 back. We've hovered right around 30 now. We've continually looking for that extra 5. We'll climb up 2 to 3 employees, and then we'll drop 3 or 4. It's an ongoing problem right now. PJ has some great data. I've been going through it last night and today. It's all completely accurate on what I'm seeing on my end on the age shift of employees that are coming in. Retention is rough. What I see is, I don't know where we're going to get that gap of jobs that are out there and the amount of people that to get them to apply for those positions. I mean, as he's talking, those records are climbing. Sooner or later, we have to start making that move towards that. And I think that's going to be our uphill battle.
And then I guess I'm also interested, I know you had talked a bit about retention and just turnover. Can you give everyone a sense of just how much turnover is happening, how quickly employees are rotating through currently?
As I said, we will hire, we can hire 5 in 1 week and then lose 4 of them within 2 weeks. That has been going on for pretty much about the last 4 months, 4 to 6. It's the possibilities of individuals getting another job are great right now. There's many jobs out there. They're not sticking where they need to be. I think they're just feeling the waters. They don't know what they want to do. Back in the day, you never really had those options. You grabbed the job, you had to stick with one because it was probably the only one left in town. Now you have these opportunities to expand yourself and see what you want to do. But as an employer, that's hard to handle because you bring somebody in, you invest some time, you train, and they walk out the door in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I guess I'm also curious too, how has the response to job openings been? Are you getting the same number of applicants as was typical before the pandemic?
We have finally got back to receiving multiple applications in a week. 6 to 8 months ago, we were receiving 1 application every 4 months. And that's with numerous advertising of, posting it out. We're hiring, everybody's hiring. And there was just nothing, there was no applications coming in, period. To now we've got a good steady flow, but it's completely changed. And PJ's demographics show that the younger crowd is coming in, and we are seeing it. I see a flow of older crowd, 50 and up, that are looking for a career change. They're ready to move on. They've been stuck in a job paying low wages for 30 years, and they're getting the opportunities now to make better money than they've ever made. And that's sad to say in this world, but I mean, the opportunities are there for all ages. It's that middle group. I don't know how we're going to get a hold of them and get them back into the workforce.
If it's okay, I'll just jump in there really quick. I won't take the time to show the picture. I'm take my word for it. I've got a good one to show you. But if you look at labor force participation by age group, pre and post pandemic, what you see is that young folks, teenagers basically, age 16 to 19. They're back participating in the labor force at rates higher than they were going into the pandemic. Then there's the sort of prime working age group. This would be 25 to 55. They're not quite back to pre-pandemic participation rates, but they're close, within a percentage point or 2. Not to minimize that, that's a lot of people, and it can make a big difference when you're sort of close to full employment. But it's the older age group, people 55 and above. It looks like there's basically been a permanent drop in labor force participation rates for that age group. I mean, time will tell if they sort of trickle back in, but it looks like a bunch of people took this as an opportunity to retire, or perhaps are making a big career change. But if you think in terms of career progression, what could be happening is that people who are sort of at the peak of their careers, late in their careers, they've decided, okay, I think I'm done doing this, and maybe I'll stop working and retire, or maybe I'll do something different. So it's leaving a bunch of vacancies in those roles, and that might mean that the people in the 25 to 55 age group are getting, applying for new jobs or getting promoted out of the positions that they're in. And then this is creating a big opportunity for people to start a career or perhaps change careers. One more thing I'll say before I quit hogging the microphone here is that the job opening and labor turnover survey gives us some additional piece of information on this. It collects data on how many people have quit. This is nationally as well. And job quits are, again, at record highs right now. So you've got job openings at record highs, job quits at record highs, and unemployment is pretty low. So I think what this means is there's just a big reshuffling of employer-employee matches that are happening right now.
Thank you for that insight, PJ. That's actually a good segue. Now I'd like to switch to over to Mark. Mark Osborn, who's the Senior VP at Corna Kokosing, a larger retailer, manufacturer in Knox County. So Mark, I guess my first question for you would be, what has employee retention looked like for Kokosing throughout the pandemic thus far?
We're construction industry, so we were essential workers, right? So when you start thinking about that, as far as being able to retain employees, provide opportunity, and working within the guidelines that were presented, we were able to do that. But to your point, construction's been looking for additional workers for quite a few years now. It's something that we've been working, at all entry level, all the way through experienced trades personnel. So it's been a challenge by all means. What you see, we as a larger company, a larger employer, we have a couple different segments, but our non-union segment, what you see is those with skills are being, if you would, attracted to other companies because you start getting into a pay differential that's being offered for those that have the ability to do work, and some of which it's, to some points getting beyond even what that person might be skilled to do, but they're still offering them, an additional, whether it's an hourly rate or whatever that package might include. So it's a competition out there to retain your better employees, if you would, to some degree. And the employees know that. So there's a lot of them with LinkedIn and all the different things that you can go on out there in this day and age. People are educated enough to be able to go out and see what's available out there. And it almost becomes, to some degree, a little bit of a, well, what can you do for me type scenario in some cases.
Yeah. And I guess too, for people who may not be completely familiar, can you give everyone a sense of how large Kokosing is and just what areas you reach to?
Well, Kokosing, all the companies incorporated all together, we have 3,500 employees. So we're working in roughly, 12, 15 states. And it's really, you see the same challenge in everywhere, in all the regions in which we work. And that is just getting folks interested in the type of work that we do, which is construction. And when you're talking the trade, but even on the professional side, when you're talking engineering managers, those types, there's still a lot of opportunity to grow in there in regards to people that might be interested in getting into construction. It's just different, and so we're obviously taking a lot of different avenues to bring that interest, and starting all the way down, if you would, in the elementary age group areas, trying to bring that up through junior high, high school, et cetera, through college, to help provide, if you would, that future supply of potential employees for us, team members.
Yeah. I guess I'm also curious too, what other recruitment strategies have you tried in terms of recruiting employees? I know you talked about getting to people when they're younger, going to schools and education that way. I wanted to see if there are other components as well.
One of the main things we want to do is educate ourselves. So it's understanding the generational differences and how you can attract individuals at all the different groups. It's interesting to listen to some of the other folks talk because we see the same thing. We are now seeing a swing in the high school age group willing to come to work, which we offer programs to do that. It's in that middle age group, maybe that late 20s to mid to late 30s and early 40s, where we're struggling to see the number of workers that we used to have. The average construction worker is 48 years old. when you look at the average. So there's going to be a huge retirement surge coming within the next, 5, 10, 12 years. So it's preparing for that. Not only the loss of the employee, but the knowledge base that goes with that. So we're doing everything. We have hiring bonuses that we're bringing on, and that's just not for folks that might have a degree. That's also for individuals that have a skill set that's unique. But it's beyond just the hourly rate. We're really trying to make the environment something that they truly want to work in. The word culture is thrown out easily and often. We truly are trying to make that culture something that folks want to be a part of. So when they go to work, they don't feel like they're leaving something to go somewhere else. It's just a continuation, hopefully, of what they would experience being around family and home to some degree.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Next, I'd like to go over to Brandy Booth with Opportunity Knox Employment Center to get a sense of what the needs are from job seekers she sees in her day-to-day work. So I guess first, Brandy, if you could start off by just telling everyone a bit about how usage of the Employment Center has changed throughout the pandemic in terms of the number of people using it, what they're using it for, the types of jobs they're seeking out in that sense.
I would have to say that the building and service uses for us has evolved through the pandemic. At the very beginning, we were helping a lot of folks navigate the unemployment system. So it was overwhelmed. People couldn't get through. We were open and we were here. So we were trying to help folks navigate through that. That kind of evolved through to a lot more requests for education services and funding. We offer a GED program for young adults here in our office, and we did see an increase in requests for GED services. We graduated 15 in 2020 of GED kids. And then we saw an increase in requests for funding for certifications, especially in the medical field. So we got a lot of requests for LPN certifications and a lot of requests for LPN to RN funding. So that was an increase. What we're seeing more now is job seekers coming in looking for work. That was expected because with the $300 extended unemployment benefit ending in June, and then the pandemic unemployment ending September 4th, we were expecting to see those increase, and we did. So even though during the pandemic, we were providing virtual services to anybody who didn't feel comfortable coming in the office, our visits to the building were down. We're starting to see an uptick in that, and that started about June. So we're not quite up to where we were pre-pandemic, but it has increased significantly since then. What has been surprising is the types of jobs people are seeking. Prior to the pandemic, we were seeing a lot more job seekers looking for manufacturing type jobs. They wanted manufacturing type jobs because typically they paid a little bit higher, and they were stable. They were stable employment. What we're seeing now is people looking more for retail type jobs. So service industry, retail specifically. And so we kind of attribute that to the fact that retailers have really increased their wages through this process. And they can be a little more flexible with scheduling than you can in the factories and the manufacturing industry.
Okay, yeah. And I also wanted to touch upon something that you brought up there, just federal assistance during the pandemic. I know some argue that federal assistance has deterred people from working. So I wanted to see how you see the pandemic era assistance factoring into the labor challenges.
What we see here for our local area is that that extended pandemic assistance may have deterred some folks initially, but our county unemployment rates have remained fairly low. Like PJ had stated before, by October, we really looked like we were rebounding from those effects. Businesses were reopening. So we do not believe that it was those benefits that were keeping people out of the workforce. This past spring, our Knox County rates were at 3.5%. of unemployment. Those rates jumped up to over 5 this summer, like PJ had mentioned when he was talking about his information. We reached out to the team up at the Ohio labor market to question that jump. And so what they explained was the county data is not seasonally adjusted, so that it's to be expected that those rates are going to increase because a lot more folks are entering the labor market looking for summer employment. So when they provided us numbers from back in 2019, it was very, very similar. So there was no cause for alarm there. As far as other assistance goes, because we hear this a lot because we are part of Job and Family Services, entitlement benefits such as OWF cash assistance and SNAP, those numbers did not increase for us during the pandemic. We currently have 11 families in Knox County receiving cash assistance benefits. And then most of the families that we have receiving the SNAP food assistance are actually working families.
Okay, thank you. And I guess too, I'm also curious just from your day-to-day work with job seekers, can you give us a sense of what some of the main things they're looking for in jobs are? Is it wages, benefits, remote options? Just any insight into what people are looking for now?
What I would say about that, previously we used to get a lot of questions about benefits. We don't hear as much about benefits right now in our current job seekers. Wage is usually the very first question they ask. What is the wage? We have had some job seekers specifically looking for work from home opportunities, but we're also hearing a lot of flexible schedules. They want flexible schedules.
Okay, great. And then too, I wanted to touch upon, because I know more recently we'd spoken for another article about an employment needs assessment that Ohio Means Jobs Knox County is now in the process of contracting. So I wanted to see if you could briefly explain some of the key components that the assessment will study.
Absolutely. We're in the process of finalizing the contract with a consulting firm, Thomas P. Miller and Associates. They're going to conduct a workforce needs assessment related specifically to Knox County. Similar assessments have been done for Licking County and Hamilton County. Those reports have helped those communities in planning moving forward, economic planning. The project is going to be led by a steering committee of local employers, educators, leaders, nonprofits, and then area development and workforce professionals. Stakeholders will be involved throughout the process. And so stakeholders are going to include high school and adult students. They're going to be working with the employed, unemployed, and underemployed county residents, employers from various industries, education institutions, and workforce professionals. Some of the data that's going to be assessed is going to be the types of jobs that the largest amount of out-of-county commuters are leaving for and why they're leaving the county. They're going to analyze the type of work experience job seekers are looking for, such as flexible hours, remote work options. They're going to provide overall barriers that the workers are facing maintaining full-time employment. So they're going to be looking at childcare. They're going to be looking at transportation, all of those things that that might be keeping people out of the workforce. They're also going to be looking at skills gap analysis, talking to employers about what the needs are for certifications, hard and soft skills training, things like that. They're going to analyze overall wages and benefits. And then they're going to look for redundancy and best practices of similar counties. So upon completion of the collection, they're going to provide us with a comprehensive report, including the strengths, deficiencies, disconnects, and opportunities that are going to be provided with recommendations for our future planning.
Thank you. And for anyone here today listening, there is a link to the Knox Pages article that goes into some details about that assessment, which is slated to be done in March. So you can scroll up to take a look and read if you're interested. So I'd like to switch to our final panelist today, who is Kristin Aspin. And she is with a Ashland County Community Foundation, specifically its Women's Fund. And she's going to speak to us a bit about workers' childcare concerns. I had spoken to her for my series back in June and July about a survey that the Ashland County Community Foundation and Women's Fund had done to assess childcare needs of workers in Ashland. So I wanted to see, I guess first, Kristin, can you tell us a bit about what the survey results showed and walk us through some key findings?
Certainly, and I will try to share my screen here real quick for a visual. Okay, and it looks like we have too many video sources, so I can do it without, not a problem. Actually, now we can do
be
it.
able to, yeah.
All right, here we go. All right. So our Women's Fund of the Ashland County Community Foundation, we're working on a targeted child care initiative here in our county. And as part of that, we then decided to do a survey out at what's now called Ashland Business Park, the formal industrial park. And this is an area of our community that has 23 companies of various sizes, mostly in manufacturing, but not all in the same area, either in the area specifically or right outside the area, very near. So when we surveyed those employees, we did have just over a 50% participation rate, or I should say completion rate, of those participants that have children. So we feel pretty confident in our data, but of the 173 respondents who work in or near industrial park, 72% of those respondents said that they would be likely to use a new child care center located near their workplace. And then of those parents, they have a total of 214 children under the age of 13. You can see as well that those parents indicated, 64% of those parents indicated a struggle to find affordable care, and then 26% each then also struggle to find dependable care, quality care, and struggle to find care that matches their work schedule. In terms of parent characteristics further, you can see that in terms of income center, going back to the struggle to find affordable care, you can see that 40% of those employees surveyed have a household income of $50,000 or less, and right about just under 70% of those surveyed had an family income level of under $75,000. And then if we look at the children by age likely to use the center, we had about 45% of the children fall in the infant and toddler category, 20% in the preschool category, and then about 35% of those students or children falling in the school age category. And in terms of what parents are requesting when they need care, the majority, it was actually 73% of those parents surveyed, said that they needed full day work care or full day care. And a full day, I do want to know, in our study was not just the traditional 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 work day, but a lot of the companies at the Ashland Business Park have shift work. And so a lot of the parents were requesting care for 10-hour shifts or 12-hour shifts. And then the all day care clearly is for the infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. And then for school agers, the type of care requested most were for summer care, all day summer care, and then after school care, snow day care, and then holidays and school breaks during the school year. So that is what the main findings of our survey out at the business park were.
Great, thank you. And I guess too, I'm just curious, based on your work throughout the years, if you see childcare challenges as a new problem or one that has existed for some time now.
Okay, definitely they've existed for some time. It's not a new issue here in our community. Through personal experience and research, I know that our community, like our current child care providers, have always been working with a wait list. And so we have a definite need for infant and toddler care in our community. We have about a dozen organizations that do offer preschool and some wraparound care, but only 3 of those offer care for infants and toddlers. So, and just to put that into perspective, in our community, we have only 26 licensed spots available for infants and 56 licensed spots for toddlers currently. So that, and then that also is congruent with our informal needs assessment that we did early in the study when we spoke with existing childcare providers as well. And then obviously access outside those traditional work hours has always for years been a barrier as well.
Yeah.
So definitely not new, but I do think the pandemic highlighted those for a lot of people.
Yeah. And then I guess too, I'd also spoken with you for some follow-up coverage, which I put in the chat, but based on these survey findings, I know now the Community Foundation is working to create a new child care center to address some of these needs that you found. So I wanted to see if you could speak a bit to what that will look like.
Certainly. So very simply put, our Women's Fund Steering Committee last year had identified childcare as a barrier for many people, often women, and it's a barrier to join the workforce initially, but also to remain in the workforce too. And I know Doug and PJ and Mark and others have mentioned too, sort of that middle area of, that 25 to 45-year-old group of workers, and a lot of times that's often that age group of workers that do need childcare before they can even think about entering or remaining in the workforce. So that's sort of where we're coming from. But what we are doing is we did informal needs assessment, feasibility study, but that led us to creating a new childcare center to be located at the Ashland Business Park, and it will be a collaborative childcare center. So instead of one large corporation that you hear about in some larger communities where they offer on-site daycare, we will have a daycare facility located right in the middle, basically, of an area that has 23 companies. So that daycare center can service their employees right on site, basically. So we, as a Women's Fund and Community Foundation, do not own or operate a child care center. That's not what we're made to do, but we can spearhead it and convene it and be the catalyst to make this change happen. So we are working with a nonprofit partner to be the owner operator of this child care center. That owner operator does have, experience in owning and operating a child care facility. A lot of the decisions to be made will come from the owner of the child care center, along with input from our Women's Fund and the data that we've collected and will continue to collect, because this is an intentional project and we want to make decisions intentionally to meet the needs in our community. So, in terms of hours of operation, days that it'll be opened, all of that, that's still to come as we continue building this process. But we do, we know we can't meet all the needs all at once, but we definitely hope to begin with being able to broaden care outside those traditional work hours. We also, are able to alleviate several childcare issues in our own community. Like I mentioned, we have a need for additional childcare spaces for all ages, so we'll be able to accomplish that. We also have a need for more infant and toddler spaces, so we'll be able to accomplish that. Also expanding care, like I mentioned, outside your traditional work hours. We're hoping to be able to start with that. And then being able to use a nonprofit organization as the owner operator. We're hoping to really make this affordable and high quality, but the affordability factor comes in to play with being able to offer grants to the nonprofit organization, create endowment funds, which will help with some of the ongoing expenses of the child care center. Employers and businesses can offer stipends and other subsidizations to their own employees to attend, for their children to attend the child care center. One of the things, our survey that we just went over is sort of a snapshot in time. So that, is sort of a starting point. But our goal really is to serve people currently, but also to really be thinking about who is not yet in the workforce that wants to be in the workforce, but childcare is a barrier and they cannot engage in working at the moment. So we're really trying to reach out to, women, because we are a women's fund, but also families and people in general, to really be able to enter the workforce if they so choose, and really just to remain in the workforce as well. Because as we've seen, when childcare falls through, there's not a whole lot people can do to remain in the workforce if they're not able to have care for their children. And then another thing we're hoping to do with this is just to develop our community and our local economy. We're hoping that this could help businesses recruit and retain employees, boost productivity, reduce absenteeism. Again, childcare is just sort of a deeply rooted, need that needs to be met in order then for the employment to take place. So that is what we're doing here in Ashland County. It's an intentional effort. We're really trying hard to meet needs that currently exist, being able to supplement what's already being offered here in our community, not duplicate, but supplement, and be able to meet the ever-changing needs as we move forward.
Thank you. And is there a timeline yet in terms of when the community can expect to see the center?
That is still being determined. It's it's a definite, it's definitely a large project. But ideally, I mean, I don't even know if I should put it out there, but in an ideal world, we would love to have this up and going by the end of 2022. So it's not something that'll be happening overnight. There's a whole lot of factors that still come into play, but yeah, ideally by the end of next calendar year would be a target.
All right, thank you. Well, now I guess we can switch to some audience questions. I did want to first take a look at the polls that we had up. If you haven't already vote quickly. But I was just looking, and based on some of the responses so far, I see that some big issues people in the audience are facing is just the ability to fill positions, retain employees, which I know we had discussed here, lack of childcare options, and we seem to have a bunch of audience members across the different community roles here. We have employers, employees, all over. So I guess first we can start with some of the questions. And for all the panelists, you can feel free to jump in, whoever feels that they have a handle on this. This first one may be best for PJ, that's in the chat, but I'll read it. It says, I recently read that if the minimum wage kept in step with labor productivity growth since 1968, it would be over $24 an hour. How much do you think that factors into the difficulties filling positions? And I see that PJ answered it a bit in the comments, but would you be able to speak a bit about that here?
Yeah, sure. The kind of classical economic theory predicts that if anything, a minimum wage that's too low would cause unemployment. And if I understand the question correctly, the point is that in real terms, the current minimum wage is quite low by historical standards. We all understand that the minimum wage has increased over time, measured in dollars, but the purchasing power of a dollar has eroded. And so I think it is the case that the minimum wage hasn't quite kept up with inflation. But nothing prevents an employer from offering a wage well above minimum wage. And that's the typical, that's one of many possible responses to an inability to fill a position, is to offer a higher wage to make it more attractive from that perspective. So I don't think that a low minimum wage is the main source of the problem employers are having filling positions. The other thing to keep in mind is that the number of people who actually earn minimum wage is very low compared to the wide distribution of wages. Those are typically entry level, low to no specific skill positions, and people quickly start getting raises. So it's the thing that a low minimum wage would tend to cause, and there's quite a bit of debate about this among economists, is unemployment among people who are the sort of the least skilled and the least experienced, who need an entry level job, because to sort of bring this back to something Doug and Mark were talking about, you kind of take a risk on hiring a new person because you train them, and then there's the possibility they may leave within a few weeks. So you got to invest time and money in that person, and it may be that the only way you can afford to do that profitably is to offer a really low wage at first. So I think I'll leave it there. Hopefully that addresses the question.
I wanted to also open up to perhaps maybe Doug or Mark or even Brandy, if you had any insights into just how you think wages are impacting the people who are seeking out jobs currently, just anyone who wanted to add some additional insight from their day-to-day as well.
What I would say is what we're seeing from employers coming through with their job postings is we aren't seeing anybody paying minimum wage. Everybody is paying above minimum wage. I recently talked to an employer who was offering $3.50 above minimum wage, and I told him he wouldn't probably find anybody at that wage even.
Yeah, Brandy's correct with that one. When we opened up 4 years ago, we were hiring in above minimum wage. We hired in at $10 an hour to attract, employees, and employees were abundant, especially when I believe it was $8.20 an hour was the minimum wage then. We're hiring now at 12 and up. Actually, I don't think we've hired anybody lower than 13 in the last 3 months. I'm not sure if it's the wage that's going to fix what our issue is. I think there's things along with childcare. Housing is one that needs looked at. There's only so many people in Ashland City that work in that age group. I have multiple employees that live in Richland County and work here. Housing's cheaper. Housing's easily available in Richland County. I know that's probably a concern in most counties and most cities. If it's something I think Ashland needs to look at in affordable housing or any kind of assistance that Brandy or anybody else can help in your areas, that's the one big concern, because the housing is going up and these individuals are needing that higher pay rate to cover that.
That's very similar to Knox County. That's happening in Knox County as well. It's very difficult to find affordable housing.
And Mark, did you want to add anything about wages as well?
In the construction industry, a lot of it comes into an apprenticeship program, so we're well above, if you would, a typical starting wage. But what we're definitely trying to entice people with is just the ability to see a substantial increase year over year by, if you would, helping with your own development, right? So if you're an apprenticeship program, if you're willing to enhance your skills, those types of things, the individual can see a 15-20% increase in pay year over year, up to a significant potential hourly amount at some point, if you're talking the trade personnel. So even our high school, though, I mentioned we do that program, we're well above minimum wage, and we were still struggling to find some individuals there for a period of time. But I did indicate that we're seeing a little bit of a resurgent, because I think everybody's also understanding, not to go down completely that path, but the college education isn't the only way to a opportunity to get a very good lifestyle and an opportunity to put yourself in position, to have a family and do, if you would, those things that can provide. So we're, again, trying to educate people on different routes. Hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. And then there's another question here that looks like it's directed at Doug, but anyone else can feel free to chime in. Someone's wondering if you do exit interviews. So if you ask why people are leaving, if they quit or retire, or just to try to get some insight into the reasons why they leave.
We would love to. I don't believe I've seen the face of the last probably 6 individuals that quit. It comes in a form of a text the night before their shift. That's what we're faced with day in and day out. Ann and I have come to terms with that. We're being played on each other from other employers trying to increase wages, and you try to be as personable as possible. And we've always had an open door policy. We've always ran this business as a family. Those things they take a toll on you as a business owner, because you open up I open up my doors to bring people in, teach them, employ them. And there's just really, the respect is minimal right now.
And then
I would love an exit interview.
Thank you. And then this other question that we have in the chat appears to be directed at Mark, but other people can chime in with insight as well. So someone is wondering if you have a trade or school agreement working in conjunction with high schools as an alternative to pushing everyone to college. So can you speak a bit about that program that you had mentioned?
We have a program that we do over our Fredericktown location, but basically it's a high school internship program where anyone over the age of 16 can come to work at our location there. We're not allowed to put them out on a project until the age of 18, but at least they're getting exposed to construction. And it's interesting, we're not just doing the typical construction, right? We have people in our accounting office, we've had people in our marketing group, we've had people working with workers' compensation. So when you think of our construction, it sometimes gets stereotyped, but we're really trying to expose them to the whole spectrum of what that might look like. For us, it's a very good investment for the students because they're our best ambassadors, if you would, when they go back as a junior, back to school as a senior. They're the ones talking to their fellow students, their peers, about the experience they had, the work that they might have been able to do, some intriguing things they might have been able to contribute. So that's really what we're trying to utilize.
Great, thank you. So those are the only questions that we got in the questions and answers box, but it appears to be one more that just popped up. So someone said, I work in the developmental disability field, and we realized that throwing money and doing sign-on bonuses are not the long-term fix. Looking at Cedar Point paying over $20 an hour and they can't recruit does say a lot to where we are. So can someone speak, I guess, to this question? They ended with saying flexible schedules are important, but not a great answer to the problem yet. So does anyone have insight into some longer term solutions that they've either implemented and have worked or that they've heard of?
I will chime in. We have contemplated multiple times of doing sign-on bonuses. We've never stepped up and done one. I'm not sure if I much believe it. I would rather take care of my employees that I've already brought in, that are here, showing that they want to be here. The sign-on bonuses and the wages, everybody's throwing them out there, but it's not the end result is it's not bringing in any more applications. If you did not have that sign-on bonus, you would still get 5 applications that week. If you did have, you would still get 5 applications that week. That's what I've been seeing day in and day out. Flexible scheduling is probably the best thing right now. Everybody wants time off. I am lucky to have an employee that probably works over 30 hours a week. It is hard for them to donate that much time out of their life and their children to work right now. So I think a lot of people are looking for extra money for less work. I've talked about that with my wife as well. Maybe we should go up higher than everybody else. Maybe you should be paying $18, $19, $20 an hour, a 25-hour week. You have more employees, but they'll be happier employees. In the long run, if I could get the same work out of 5 that I only needed 7, but they're all making $3 more an hour, maybe that's another avenue to head. We haven't really implemented anything like that, but it is an idea. Paying it's in my industry, you have fixed amount of percentage of labor. I have to stay around 30%, or we're not going to make any money because food's always 40%, then utilities. So you have to stay at that. And if you can stay at that with more hourly wage, less employees and happier employees because they're making good money, can afford housing, can afford childcare, maybe that's the way to go.
I also wanted to see, I was going to go to Brandy to see if you have an insight just from speaking with job seekers too.
What I was going to say is I'm really hoping that our workforce needs assessment is going to answer Steve's question, to give us some insight as to what to do going forward. Give us some ideas because this consulting firm is going to give us recommendations.
We have a few other questions in the chat. So one that I'm seeing, so this person, Dan, asked, Gallup Company has cited that 69% of job quits or change jobs because of poor management or culture, and that career advancement and job fit just isn't there. And I wanted to specifically ask Mark about this because I know we had previously discussed some efforts he was making to try to reassess that culture and just career advancement opportunities in the construction field. So Mark, do you have any insight on that? And then free to open up to anyone else as well.
It was interesting. We actually talked about this morning and I threw the culture word out. It's something that a lot of folks put out there and people want to experience that. So what does that truly look like? And to your point of development and growth, I mean, that's what we want to be able to do is we call it our tree of growth. So when a person comes to work for us, they can see visually what opportunities are there to start with initially, but they can also see what they can grow into. It's work, right? It's not going to be handed to them. They got to be able to come in and they can either grow laterally, horizontally, if their experiences changes or their desire to go in a different path because of whatever life changes to them. They have kids and they no longer can work in the field. They would prefer to work in an office environment. We're trying to our best way to show what that looks like to an individual so that they can plan accordingly and have an idea of what development potentially could mean to them. But we're also there to help them understand that, we can support their growth and development, but it starts with their own initiative to do it. So it really comes back to that worker showing that desire to push themselves, if you would, to some point.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to add anything on that point? If not, we have a few other questions. Okay, so we have one question that's specifically directed for PJ from my colleague Grant Pepper. So Grant asked, is there historical precedent for this kind of an employment dynamic with these kinds of challenges facing employers? And if so, what was the way out?
That's a great question. I thought about it a little bit leading up to this, and in the recessions the recessions and the recoveries that I'm familiar with, none of them have been quite like this in terms of this super rapid recovery. In fact, if anything, economists have been talking about why recession recoveries seem to be so slow. So time will tell. I do wonder if this pandemic happened over top of another sort of secular change in the economy. So it's really hard for us to kind of see what's going on right now. And that's demographic shifts and, changes in the patterns of consumption that, where people buy their stuff, how often they go out to dinner, what types are. So it's going to take us a little time to sort this all out. But while I'm at it, I just wanted to mention there is a really great article in the Wall Street Journal back in early August about a rubber parts manufacturer in northeastern Ohio, and they interviewed the owner of this company at length about his struggles with attracting and retaining employees, and he talks a lot about, okay, if I raise wages, that might create a bunch of problems for existing employees. And just like what Mark was saying, is fundamentally this guy has figured out that what he's got to do is configure the jobs, reconfigure them so that they're a little bit more rewarding in terms of what the job is like now and what the prospects are for the future. It's the date of the article was August 6th. It's not as good as Emma's reporting on local labor conditions, but it provides a little insight.
Thank you, PJ. And we have another question too over in the chat. Marty is asking about on-the-job trainings. So I wanted to see if anyone who does that can speak to that a bit and just what that looks like.
I'm assuming it's directed towards us. We do a lot of on-the-job training from the day one. As soon as they step in, we have knife skills. You have serve safe. You have there's responsibilities you have to have for the health and safety of your employees, your coworkers, and my customers. I am on the advisory board with the JFS here in town, and I have mentioned to them of stretching out, and helping out with job training. There are things when you bring in a new employee in, they do need to know your basic skills of knife training, and those are things that we just don't have time to do. We are so busy, so short-staffed, and if there was services out there that would give off this training, is one that I'm looking at it. My industry would be a great help compared to bringing in and training as you go. I'm assuming that Mark knows if you bring somebody in that's never ran a pan before, you just don't stick them in the driver's seat and say, here you go. It's going to be a scary day. So on-site training is needed, and it's extensive and it's expensive. And once the retention's there, it's not an issue. But that retention is hard right now, to be training and knowing tomorrow you're going to be training another person because that one just left, and it's the same training over and over.
And I'm also wondering too, Brandy, if you could speak a bit too, because I know you do like skilling up and just different trainings to help people acquire skills that they may not have. So that may be relevant to touch upon here if you have some insight.
I was going to mention, we actually fund for our local employers on the job training to help offset the cost of training. So we work with several employers here locally and use our WIOA funding that we receive to help pay the cost of on the job training for eligible people. We also do we fund training for all kinds of certifications. I mentioned earlier the medical field, the LPN and LPN to RN, but we fund HVAC, we fund welding, we fund CDL drivers, we fund IT. So there are several fields that we fund. And so what we're doing right now is anything that is being requested, we're taking a look at it. If it's an in-demand field, and it can lead to self-sufficient employment, then we're definitely giving it a serious consideration.
Mark, did you want to chime in there? I saw that you had unmuted.
Just reiterating, I mean, training is going to be hopefully something that the individual, when they come, especially to construction, is going to have to get. I mean, and that's back to the employer again of understanding what the skill set is. But I think where we struggle is I heard the term soft and hard skills coming, in an earlier discussion. That's really what it's about. Are they showing up to work every day, ready to go, on time, excited about what they're supposed to do? And we struggled seeing that in some regards. But on the job training is there, no matter whether it's a professional onboarding program for the individual coming in with not quite the skills, but they show those other characteristics we're excited about, or whether it's a trade personnel. So it does exist.
On accident.
All right. So we'll squeeze in one last question that we have here. One of our audience members is wondering whether you all see healthcare benefits playing a big factor in whether you're able to hire workers.
I think it's been said already, and healthcare, I think, is mentioned, but it's not as prevalent as it has been in years past. Time, right? So the flex schedule, can you do some, what's this going to look like for me? Am I going to be working X amount of hours? Am I allowed to work from home versus having to come to work every day? All those things seem to be out there that we are, trying to configure, because obviously in our world, you can't work from home and build bridges. So it's just something that we're trying to figure out. What does that look like? Because as soon as it's offered for one, the other person that might not be able to experience that because their job doesn't allow that differential there suddenly comes into play as well. So you get into that whole compensation total package of what it looks like specifically for what that job looks like, along the lines of what PJ was mentioning before there. So.
All right. Thank you. If there are no other questions, we can wrap up for the day. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you to all of our panelists for the insight you've provided. As Brittany said in the chat, if you enjoyed this event today and this kind of reporting, we could use the support, so consider some memberships. We appreciate you joining, and always feel free to reach out with news tips, questions, or concerns you may have as we continue to look into this issue in the future. So thank you all.
Thank you.